Three. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Callaghan, and I'm from Fab Book Reviews. And also, I work at the Okanagan Regional Library System. And I'm so thrilled that I get to do this panel with two incredible, wonderful authors, Paulie Horvath, and we have Francie Greenslade. So, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over to the authors. Please, if you could introduce yourselves and just give us a little bit of information about your books and the current books that we're going to be talking about today. That would be lovely. So again, welcome. We're so excited. I'm just so excited to be doing this conversation with you. So please go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I am Paulie Horvath, and I've written many books for children, and my new book is Pine Island Home.
I'm Francie Greenslade, and I'm the author of Red Fox Road, and I've written some books for adults as well. The last one was called Shelter, and I live in Penticton.
And Paulie, were there, I know you've been well known for previous books like Everything on a Waffle and a few other books, The Night Garden as well?
Yes, a lot of them came out of Vancouver Island where I live. A lot of them are set there. The Trolls, which
that's right, the Trolls, yeah.
And The Canning Season, which was in the U.S., a National Book Award winner, and a new picture book coming out with Holiday House called Not a Smiley Guy. And yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So we're going to dive right into the questions if that's okay. So let's start off. And again, this is questions relating to Paulie Horvath's Pine Island Home and Francie Greenslade's Red Fox Road. Although we're going to get into some broader questions later about books and writing advice and things like that. But we're going to start off with books specific to the questions. So if you could, actually, before we start on the questions, could you give like a brief synopsis of your books, if that would be possible for the ones that we're talking about, if you're okay to do that? Just like, Francie, could you just give us a little synopsis of Red Fox Road for readers who might not be familiar?
Sure. Sure. Red Fox Road is a novel about a girl who goes on a driving trip with her family, and their car breaks down and they become stranded on a remote mountain road, and the girl ends up having to survive on her own for a length of time.
Thank you. And Paulie, for Pine Island Home?
Pine Island Home is the story of the four McCready sisters who lose their parents in a tsunami in Thailand, and they are trying to find someone to take all four of them. Finally, they find an aunt who lives on Pine Island in British Columbia, and she takes the four of them in. But when they arrive to live with her, they find that she's died of a sudden heart attack while they were in transit, and they're left with no guardian. And they're terrified that they're going to be split apart and given to different foster families. And so the rest of the book is Fiona, the oldest, trying to keep the family together.
Thank you. And can I just say, the books are incredible, just so beautifully written. And yes, so I just love them so much. I have them right here next to me. They're just really lovely. So yes, and I hope as many readers as possible get to them, because I just think they're just marvelous. So okay, so I'm going to start into the questions. So how different were the early versions of Pine Island Home and Red Fox Road to their final edit? And I just was wondering if there were any key story components that didn't make the cut, or any major changes that readers would be surprised to hear about. Sorry, Paulie, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear?
Oh, I said, Francie, did you want to start?
Oh, okay.
Sure. So unlike most of my books, nothing much changed in this book. It's the first time for me that the very first sentence I wrote remained in the final version of the book. And usually my openings, usually openings especially change quite a bit. But I wrote the first sentence, and I was writing longhand, and I kept writing, and I guess I must have been storing the story for a while because it seemed to come out quite smoothly. So not too much actually changed in the final version.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's surprising to hear, because you think of major changes happening along the way, but I guess if you had that story, like you just knew what that story was going to be, then it didn't have any big surprises.
It's rare for me, actually. It's very
Oh.
rare for me, but this, it just happened with this one. Yeah, usually I do change quite a lot.
Okay. Okay, and Paulie, for your
It's
book?
interesting because I had the same experience.
Oh.
My book was pretty much the same from the first draft to the last, except for the title change. And it was originally called Martha's Boat because in the story, the aunt is named Martha, and she has a boat which she says is her family and her purpose. And she says everybody should have a family and a purpose.
Mm.
And that ends up being endemic to the story. But they didn't want to use both the Canadian publisher and the US publisher weren't crazy about the title because they said we'll have to put a boat on the cover and there's no real boat that in the story. And so the boat was really a metaphor. So we went back and forth and I changed it to Pine Island Home. And then interestingly, the Germans decided they preferred Martha's Boat, so they kept that title.
Oh,
but
okay.
the thing that I thought was interesting about that was that when I changed it, I mean, with Pine Island Home, for me, it opened up a whole lot of possibilities in terms of what I would do in the future with it. Because with Martha's Boat, it was sort of, the story was all about this one thing, and the characters weren't going to move from there. When I opened it up to Pine Island Home, I could see it in terms of a series with Pine Island, the one I just finished now, Pine Island Christmas, Pine Island this, Pine Island that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became more of a story about the ongoing lives of these sisters, and became something else. And that was really a product of a title change. So that was kind of an important thing to have happened to the book, I think.
Okay. In terms of story elements, though, most of it stayed intact through from the beginning to the...
Yeah, it was really, by the time I was done with it and sent it in to my publisher, I really felt very solid with it. There wasn't a lot that needed to be done. And my editor felt that way as well, that there weren't any major story elements that needed to be changed. I mean, sometimes you muck around with them for a long time before you reach a draft that you're really pleased with. But this one seemed to come fairly easily. So
Okay.
it's nice when that happens. It's rare.
It sounds nice. I'm just going to move on to the second question, if that's okay, that I have. So in Pine Island Home, so there's tragedy that befalls the McCready sisters in not one but two sudden devastations, and there's a third big heartbreak that comes a little bit later. And in Red Fox Road, the main character Francie is not only grieving in multiple ways, but she's also contending with a mother who has illnesses that she's dealing with, and huge story shifts that leave her alone for the majority of the novel. And when you're contending with a story that deals with such pervasive loss and intense heartbreak, how do you approach balancing the emotion and fortitude of your main characters, especially because they are young, so young?
Which one do you want?
I think Francie's microphone is off. Paulie, are you okay to start? Oh, you're back. Okay. Francie, do you want to begin with that one? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think in my experience, any kind of loss while it's happening feels like the end of the world. And I've always found it strange how the world goes on in spite of my personal devastation, and it seems cruel to me. But slowly, sometimes really slowly, I figure out a way to go on. And that's the part of the story that really interests me, is that most of us are really so resilient. As we've seen during this pandemic, we're resourceful and we find ways to survive little by little sometimes. And that's what I really like to focus on. It interests me, the way in which we're able to find just small steps that we can take. And in Red Fox Road, it's literal steps that she takes. So I kind of liked that as a metaphor too, that she's it's metaphorical and it's literal. She's taking these these steps towards survival.
So one step at a time.
Yeah,
Sometimes is all you can do, right?
yeah,
One step
exactly.
at a time. Yeah. And Paulie, how about for the characters, the McCready sisters?
Well, in Pine Island Home, when the reader comes into the story, the parents have been dead for a year already, so the girls have been through that first grief. But Fiona talks about how she tries to remember things that her mother has said, as though she's hanging on to her mother that way. And one of the things her mother always said was that you can either look at the world and see all the joy, or you can see all the sorrow. And so she takes that as a starting point, and she decides that she's going to try to see joy in things. But what she comes to conclude later on is that actually you can hold both things. That her mother, she says, my mother wasn't necessarily right there, that you're able to hold all the joy and all the sorrow at the same time. And that's sort of an important underpinning of the story. And so I tried, even though these things happen to each of the girls in the story, Natasha gets lost in the woods, Charlie has to deal with a bear, also to show the things that gave them great joy. Marlon discovers that because she has to cook for the family, she discovers how much she loves it. Natasha discovers how much she loves the birds and nature on Pine Island. And so that the reader isn't just struggling. The reader gets to see this kind of natural curves in life where, good things happen, bad things happen, good things happen, bad things happen. It's not just a straight line in their
It's not all tragedy.
It's not all tragedy for them. And they're yeah.
I love the part where she learns to cook.
That's
really like that.
Well, I think I'm very domestic, and I really felt that very deeply. I mean, you know what it's like, Francie. One of the great things about writing is that you get to experience whatever your characters are experiencing at the time. I'm not a gardener, but when I wrote the canning season, there was a little girl who was a gardener, and I could feel how it felt to her when she put her hands in the earth. And it's kind of nice you get to have this life that you haven't actually had through
yeah. And sometimes they surprise you. The characters surprise you in what they do learn. You just have to go along with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think coming from the outside of writing, people often look in and they think that you're taking these things and putting them into the book, whereas you're kind of watching these things unfold and putting them on paper, but it's not a conscious part. It's not a conscious act for the writer.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to head on to the next question. So in both Pine Island Home and Red Fox Road, sisters play an integral story role, but in very different capacities. When crafting your stories, was there ever a draft? I guess we sort of answered this in the first question, but was there ever a draft that didn't include a sibling or siblings? And what was it about sisterhood in particular that made it such a core facet of these stories?
Yeah, I think, well, I have 4 sisters and
a
brother.
Okay.
Yeah. So sisters are a huge part of my reality. We're very close.
Okay.
In Red Fox Road, Francie has a twin sister, and I don't know where that idea came from exactly. I think it became a way to represent how close they are. But the relationship with sisters, anyone who has a sister knows that it can be complicated too. It's not always straightforward, and it is in Red Fox Road, and there's a subtle contest for their mother's love.
Yes, that was it just pulled at my heart. I don't have sisters, I have a brother, but that Francie just constantly felt like she was just pulling and just wanting so much of her mom's attention, and just that jealousy she felt it. Well, it really got to me when sorry, go ahead.
And she feels, I guess, obviously, but she feels like she's kind of lost that contest. And I don't want to give too much away, but there's circumstances in the book that sort of add to that feeling of her having lost the contest, and it's something she she struggles with throughout
Yeah.
the story.
But there was never a time where there was no twin sister, right? Like you said, most of the story elements were there from
Yeah, I think I have a sister in my novel Shelter as well, and it's funny that I only have one. She seems to represent, the one sister represents, I guess, all of what my sisters are to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all wrapped into one.
Okay. And for Paulie, for Pine Island Home?
Well, it's kind of the reverse of what you said, Francie, where they the one sister represents all of them. In Pine Island Home, it's all the sisters. Fiona talks about how all the sisters are part of one entity, which is more of an exploration of what it is to be in a family. I think that they are all have these different elements, and but somehow all of them are important to the one thing. And I don't think I could imagine this story without the four sisters, but for me, it's not a matter of choosing the characters. I mean, I sit down to write and you're typing away and the things show up, and it's almost like watching it on television and you just write what's there. And so those four sisters showed up, and they were all quite different, and it was interesting. And then I did a second book with them. And I think, you sort of write them until they're played out, but it was never a matter of a conscious choice if there's going to be four sisters.
Okay. Now, this is going, the next question is going on to a question about outdoor skills and survival, or outdoor skills and knowledge, or so thinking about, for Red Fox Road, thinking about Francie's incredible outdoor skills and all this knowledge that she has, as well as in Pine Island Home, Fiona and her sister's determination to adapt and remain so strong. How big a part do you think that luck actually plays in surviving tragedy or an emergency situation? Do you believe that luck and circumstance, along with preparedness and resolve, play an equal hand?
Well, I think that's such a huge question that it's almost hard to answer, because
I know.
I was watching a Passage to India last night, and there's a character there who they're asking him, well, what should we do about this woman's rape in the trial, and how to help Dr. Aziz, and the guy says, well, it doesn't really matter what you do, because what's going to happen is a foregone conclusion. It's all been destined to be this way. So, I mean, there's that. I mean, it depends on what story you want to believe. And but I think that in terms of luck, if they hadn't met Ms. Webster, if they didn't have Alice, the next door neighbor, then it would just be a completely different story. So as a writer, it's interesting to me, because it's sort of like when you're sitting down with your kids and you're saying, well, this is how your father and I met, and you're here because I went to school in this city, and if I hadn't had this person as a teacher who didn't introduce me to this person who didn't, and you can go through the whole thing, then you think, well, it would have been a different life and you would have been different people. It's the same thing for your characters. If this twist or turn hadn't happened, the story, but you're writing that particular story probably for a reason, something's driving that book forward. And so I think that it's not just a question of luck, it's a question of these things happened because this was so right for these characters and this, what you were trying to say with this book.
Okay.
That's a very long way of saying it. Francie probably has a totally different answer.
Well, somewhat different, but I also found the question really interesting. I don't think I really thought about it. But
really? Okay.
Yeah, it was just an interesting question. I think there probably is an element of luck in any survival situation, but I think it's less of a factor than we might assume, because often we credit things to luck when actually there was a stage set for that luck to happen. And so I think when the family truck breaks down, it's luck or lack of luck, it's bad luck. But then each decision that they make or they don't make either puts them in the path of luck, that something lucky, or the opposite. And so I feel like there's a, you know, things unfold oftentimes, not always, I don't think, but oftentimes things do unfold because of certain steps that we've taken. And I think that's sort of the basis of the survival techniques, is that you make small decisions that are going to lead you somewhere. And if you make a bad decision, is, for example, to strike out through the woods looking for help, can it be corrected?
Yes.
And that's something you'd have to sort of think about before you take that step. So yeah, that's not a clear answer, I don't
No,
think.
but it was just weighing on my mind so much as I was reading both of the stories, and I finished, especially for Francie. She makes certain decisions that I don't want to give any spoilers, but she comes equipped with so much knowledge of the outdoors and what to do, what not to do. And she has this like library of knowledge within her, but then there's also things that happen that are honestly out of her control. And then I was thinking of the McCready sisters and things that just happen, right? The tragedy that happens, but also the steps they make consciously to keep themselves together, or, you know, the attempts to stay together. And it was just, it was just weighing on my mind when I was reading the stories and thinking about the characters. And I don't want anything bad to happen to these characters, you know? You just want them to survive through everything. So
yeah, it's interesting. I don't think this is giving anything away because it's right at the beginning of the book. In Paulie's book, in Pine Island Home, the tsunami at the beginning, that's an example of that thing that you just can't control, or you can't do anything to control it or predict it. So yeah.
We're glad you don't want to have anything bad happen to the characters, Michelle. That's a good sign.
No, I just fell in love with them so much that I'm like, if something else bad happens to these characters, oh no, but you just want to keep them safe in your heart.
Oh my God, will someone just kill off these characters, please?
Can you? Yeah. Oh. No, I love them all so much. So I'm just gonna go to the next question, if that's okay. So if this is going into someone who would be interested in writing a survival story. So if there were someone who was interested in writing a story centered around survival or siblings dealing with parental loss, what key elements would you suggest that they incorporate in their story? And do you have any fictional or nonfiction reads that you would recommend to be read in preparation for that? Francie, did you
go ahead?
Oh, okay.
I know, it was like Francie and I are just sitting here going, who's going to go first? Well, that's a toughie, because I would never give advice to another writer, and I wouldn't take advice from another writer.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, never, because it's so much your own little world, and it's you have to be very clear that you're coming from, you know, you're sitting down and you're writing true, so you're not, you know, sort of bringing in outside elements. But I would say, and also I have to say that it's what every book has something that's driving it forward. So this book, the Fiona wants to keep the family together. That's on the surface what's propelling the book forward. But there's something more important underneath that's actually more thematically important, which is not so much the survival of the family, is that Fiona sees very early on, as do her sisters, that the parents, people you love can just disappear, boom, like that. The parents are gone in a tsunami, and she's been grown up in this religious family. The parents are missionaries.
Yes.
They've obviously been brought up to believe that there's an afterlife, but she now, with the parents gone, and worrying that the sisters are all going to disappear as well into different foster homes, she's dealing with the issue of people you love will disappear. That's a given. And that and so what do you do with that, knowing that they're, you know, people that you may never see again? And it really is an open-ended question, because we don't really know how to answer that. We do know that, you know, people you love are going to disappear and die and everything, and so that's sort of really the sort of uneasy question beneath. So it's survival, but it's not the main question, I would say. So that's a roundabout way of it's a different question that I would be asking there.
Okay.
I think. Francie?
Yeah. Well, I am gonna give advice. No, just because I teach creative writing, so I'm sort of do give advice sometimes about writing. But I agree with you totally, Paulie, that it's really good to ignore a lot of things that people say. Imagine if all writers took Hemingway's advice, which, you know, didn't seem like it was very successful coping strategies. But one of the things that I've learned about survival in the wilderness that people might not think about, and I find really interesting in writing, is that it's kind of comes back to the last question, that it's often people get into trouble through a series of small mistakes, not one big mistake. So it's not like you step off a cliff and, you know, you have to deal with it. Usually it's things like you didn't bring a map, and then you didn't tell anyone where you were going, and you didn't bring extra clothes, and you know, you don't have cell phone service, and different things that kind of add up to this survival situation. I find that really interesting, and so that's something that I like to write about when I'm writing about survival. And I do, a lot of people are probably familiar with Hatchet. I have a copy of that.
Oh yeah, Gary Paulson.
Hatchet, Gary Paulson. I mean, I love that book. My son read it when he was young, and that was the first time I'd read it. And so it's a real classic survival situation. And then I read a lot of you know, handbooks about survival. There's an old one called How to Stay Alive in the Woods by this Bradford Angier, and he tells about how to make little shelters and how to, you know, start a fire and just different, you know, how to recognize plants that you can eat. I find all that kind of stuff fascinating. So I do read a lot of those to
Did you read
my research. Sorry?
Did you read My Side of the Mountain?
I did, yes. I love that book. Yeah.
Lovely. I'm sorry, but can I just ask you, do you go out hiking a lot? Do you go and
I do, yeah. I don't have the survival skills that Francie has in the book, but I try. I love hiking, and I love all kinds of wilderness adventures. So yeah.
And you wrote a little bit at the end of Red Fox Road about an experience that you had where you were stranded for a period of time. And I hope this isn't giving anything away.
No.
But and how that sort of it got into your mind, and Francie's story as well, and your experience, which wasn't like Francie's in the book, but just the idea of being stranded and just being completely just out of sorts, and what to do in that situation. Yeah.
When you kind of realize you've got yourself into a situation that you're not sure that you know the way out of, it's a very I think that feeling sticks with you. And I've actually had a few experiences of that. So yeah, it definitely sort of was percolating in the back of my mind for a long time.
Thank you. Now I'm going to, this is a little bit of asking you about favorite authors and characters growing up. So if you could talk a little bit about your favorite authors and favorite heroes of fiction when you were growing up, and if they impacted your storytelling and your protagonists in your writing.
Well, my favorites were Edward Egar's 7 books, magical books that were middle reader books, and I really wanted to write a 7th one. I loved all of his characters. I thought his books were perfect children's books. I mean, I loved other ones too. I loved Roald Dahl and Louise May Alcott and just a slew of them, but I really loved the Edward Egar ones, and there wasn't an 8th book, so I wrote to him when I was about 8 and said, would you write another one? And the publisher wrote back and said, well, he's dead. So, I thought, well, I'd write the next one because I just wanted to keep it going. And I tried desperately to write for years an eighth Edward Eager type book, and discovered very early on that I couldn't do it. I couldn't write his characters, or and it was a very sad time for me when I found out I was only going to be writing my own books. But I thought his books were really wonderful. But then there's other ones that I didn't like as a kid that I love as an adult, like Bedknobs and Broomsticks and the Little House books, which I didn't like as a kid but love as an adult, and Harriet the Spy, which I thought was too edgy when I was a little girl. I think we had a very protected childhood when I was growing up. But mostly, I think probably Edward Eager.
And for you, Francie?
I was just thinking that what Paulie just said, that's to me really good advice for writers, to write the book you want to read, and so I think that's a good place to start. I really remember, I mean, there's a lot of books that I could name, but what really stands out to me is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. And well, first of all, the main character's name was Francie, so that meant something to me. And her brother was Neely, and my brother's name is Neil. So yeah. But I remember when I read that book, I kind of thought, I bet my mom doesn't know what this book is about, or she wouldn't let me read it. I mean, I just felt like I had this feeling like, you can say that in books. I just, you know, she has an alcoholic father, for example, and just a lot of the things that happened seemed kind of like things that, yeah, I just hadn't read in books before. And so it really kind of opened that possibility to me that you could write about those, you know, things that really mattered, I guess. And so, but that was set in New York, of course. And so another book that really had an impact on me, I was a bit older, it's really an adult book, but A Bird in the House by Margaret Lawrence, which is actually connected short stories, but it starts with Vanessa, the narrator, when she's about 9 years old. So, and then the stories go through her experience as she grows up. So it feels somewhat like a book for, you know, someone to start reading when they're younger and could read again and again. And I don't know how many times I've read it. I found on my bookshelf that I actually have 3 copies of it. And I don't know why I ended up with 3 copies, but I think I just bought it forgetting where the other one was. But it also, the more important thing I think about that book is that Margaret Lawrence is from Manitoba, where I was living at the time when I read it. And she actually went to University of Winnipeg, where I went, and the stories are set in Manitoba, so it has snow and there's loons and all those things that made me feel like, oh wow, you know, maybe my very ordinary life can be something I can write about, you know. So that really had an impact on me.
I remember, I mean, I loved Harriet the Spy was one of my probably the favorite. I read a lot of Lois Lowry, but I remember when I read Canadian fiction, and when there were characters that were in BC or Vancouver Island and places that I had been familiar with, like that I knew, that I had grown up with, how important it felt.
Yeah.
You know? Because because even as a Canadian reader growing up, you're saturated with a lot of American novels, or, you know, which is fine. But I remember feeling so special when there was a Canadian author, something set that was in Canada. Yeah, so absolutely, it just felt like, wow, this is really something to have, you know.
Yeah.
The next question, it kind of leads into this, talking about children's lit and middle grade fiction, which is such a potent area of literature, and it really does have the power to create lifelong readers. And it's a source of joy and comfort and fun and even explanation, something kids turn to for explanation. Could you please talk about your respective experiences in writing middle grade fiction, and where you see its future? And for Francie, since Red Fox Road is your debut in children's literature, how did you find the transition from adult and nonfiction writing to writing for a younger audience?
Hmm. Yeah, actually, it's interesting that the transition for me was not really conscious in a way. My last novel, Shelter, was called a young adult crossover, and it was marketed as an adult novel, but the narrator is young, and I believe she's about 9 when the story starts, but she's mostly around 14, 15 throughout the book. So it seems to come, young narrators seem to be my thing, and so I just sat down to write the story, and it was just the story that I wanted to tell. And the narrator was 13, and I was really taken back to my 13-year-old self when I was writing the book, and that is why I named her Francie. So it might be confusing to some people. It's not a true story, but I named her Francie because I felt as if I was writing to that person, that reader that I was when I was 13, and I really wanted to kind of hold on to that feeling. So I kept the name. I kept meaning to change it, and then by the time I got to the end of the book, I felt like it was Francie, and I couldn't change her name. So, but I think that feeling of discovery and joy that I had when I was I think I obviously had it earlier as a reader, but when you're 12 and 13, around that age, it's a time, for me at least, when I was really starting to discover who I was and saying, I'm like this, I'm not like that, kind of sorting through choices. And so books helped to confirm that for me. And it was just a wonderful feeling of finding characters who thought the way that I thought and felt things that I had felt. And I just feel like that's so priceless. And, adults are also drawn to middle grade fiction, I think, probably because it's so grounding. It's like you remember who you are and who you've always been. And it's nice to go back to that and remember, oh yeah, that's who I was, and I'm still that person. Even though all these things have happened, I'm still that person at the core. So I just love that. It's probably my favorite genre of fiction, honestly.
One of my absolute favorites always. Middle grade is just, like you said, there is something grounded, so grounded in it. Yeah. Yeah. Paulie?
I'm just going to leave that there because I thought that was a really good answer. So I don't think you can add anything really.
Okay. So now I'm going to be asking about more book stuff, but if you could talk about some of your favorite reads of the last few years, and this is in any genre, if you could share with readers and listeners some books that you really enjoyed or new authors that you discovered, and also if you could if you have any recommended reads you'd suggest to readers just looking for something wonderful. And again, it could be in any genre. We could stick to middle grade if you'd prefer, or young adult, but really anything that's just kind of blown you away or been something incredible over the last few years or so.
Well, I don't read any kids books anymore. I actually only read for pleasure. And I mean, I do that quite consciously. People wanted me to get into English when I was younger, but I didn't want to because I wanted to make sure. I know so many people have gone into English and they do a lot of critical reading, and they say that they just can't read for pleasure anymore. I never wanted to reach that point. So I'm mostly reading just adult books. The one that I really loved, and I get asked in panels like this a lot, is there a book you wish you had written? And I always think no, because I only want to have written my own books, really, as much as you love other people's books. But there was a book that came up lately that I wish I had written. I remember being very surprised at my reaction to that. And it's Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See.
Oh,
Such a brilliant,
Beautiful, yeah.
novel.
Yeah.
And it was funny because years ago, I was browsing the stacks and I picked up Four Seasons in Rome, which was just this sort of slim volume of his family's year in Rome. And I picked it up not because he was famous at the time at all, but because I love Italy and going to Rome. So I just thought it would be a wonderful little Italian read. And it was such a powerful little book. I ended up writing him a fan letter, which I should do more often, and I don't. And I'm sorry that I don't. But he wrote a really nice letter back. So then when he came out with an incredible novel, I remember feeling sort of responsible. But it was just such a wonderful book. And then I also read lately Chop Suey Nation, which was a great read. It's by Anna Hugh. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but she was a Globe and Mail journalist who traveled from Vancouver Island to Newfoundland and stopped at all these little Chinese restaurants in these little small towns. And it turned out to be really a story of the people who started these restaurants. And it's a very touching book. It's just fascinating. And one other one I would suggest is Travels with Myself and Another by Martha Gellhorn, who is a Collier's war correspondent and brilliant writer. And these are very funny of stories of trips that she's taken that have turned out disastrously. And she was also Hemingway's wife, but and he appears in there, but not under his own name in her trip to China. So it's a beautifully written book and very funny. So those would be my three that I've enjoyed lately.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. And Francie?
Yeah, I have one of them here, the Quintland sisters. I don't know, you're in Kelowna, Michelle. So I believe that Shelley Wood, well, I think she's from Vancouver. It's written by Shelley Wood, but I think she has a Kelowna connection. If I'm not sure if she's
I've seen that book. I've seen that book cover, but I haven't. And is this something you recently read?
Yeah, not too long ago, and I loved it. Yeah, of course, it's about sisters, and it's got an historic. It's based in historic fact. It's about the quintuplets who were born in the 30s, 1934, in Ontario, and became their own industry. It's really fascinating. It's fiction, of course, but it's yeah, I guess not, of course, but it is fiction. And but there's a lot, you can see that she's really done her research, and so there's a lot of what she writes is what actually happened in terms of sort of the basics of it. But it's amazing. I remember my parents talking about the Quintland sisters, and I wasn't, I don't know if they were even born by then. I think they were, yeah. But it obviously they were famous for many years. So I used to live in Ontario when I was younger. So yeah, that's a really great book. I love it. It's kind of compelling. Yeah.
Is there another one that's if you'd like to share another title?
I will. This one, I don't know if you can tell, I dropped it in the bathtub, but unfortunately, this is Emily of New Moon by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which I just loved. And I actually only read this, I think maybe in the summer for the first time. And I was so surprised that I'd never read it before, because it's about a girl who wants to be a writer, and she's an orphan, and that story that I love. And she loves, it's so poetically written. She loves the outdoors and nature, and yeah, I thought it was a beautiful book. So that's my other recommendation, especially for people who want to be writers.
That's okay. That's my mother's favorite book, and I remember she was pushing that book on us the whole time we were growing up because she just loved it. I haven't heard it spoken of in years. Sorry, Francie.
Yeah. I think they did. They reissued they did reissues or new editions of, I think, the Anne of Green Gables series, but also the Emily of New Moon. So they have this gorgeous covers. I think Ellie McKay did some of the covers for them. Yeah, Emily of New Moon. Really... I haven't reread it. Oh, it's so gorgeous.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was such a fan of Anne of Green Gables growing up, and I read Jane of Lantern Hill. But Emily of New Moon sometimes gets forgotten about. Like in that it kind of gets shuffled, and you kind of forget. But people who love it, it's just magical. It's really lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you for the recommendations. Now, this is asking about upcoming projects, and Paulie, you actually talked, which delighted me when I heard that there is going to be more of the McCready sisters, which I was hoping when I finished it. I said, I sincerely, it feels unfair to ask an author, please, can you write more of these characters? It is unfair, but you did mention that there are going to be more stories featuring the sisters.
Yes, Pine Island Christmas. I'm working on the second draft right now, and should be pretty soon. So yeah, and I don't know if it's going to go beyond that. And then I have a picture book that with Holiday House right now, and so that should be coming out soon as well.
Okay. And are there for Francie? And I just wanted to ask, because the ending of, again, no spoilers, but the ending of Red Fox Road leaves so much yet to be, I feel, to be explored or answered. But do you think it's a standalone, or do you think you might?
I'm working on a sequel to it. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's called Green Mountain Academy, and it's about an all-girls wilderness school, something I think I might have invented. I don't know if there is such a thing, but
I think there are wilderness they're probably maybe not schools, but I've heard of of course adventure programs and things like that.
Yeah, so it's an all-girls school, and takes place in the hills near here, near Penticton, and
is it starring Francie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm so excited. Sorry, I'm just very, very excited. I love that. I know not every book can have a follow-up, but these characters, I love them all so much. So it's delight. It's just such a delight to hear that there will be more from the characters. So exciting. So, but you don't have date in the next few years, maybe, possibly?
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. I'm almost finished this one, so hopefully it won't be too long.
Oh wow, that's so exciting. Okay. I think that I didn't expect to hear that there would be sequels, so it's such a treat to know that there will be sequels. And for Paulie, a picture book that is finished, or that is out, or when will that be out?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Hopefully 2022, probably.
Okay.
Illustrations take a while.
Okay. And Francie, do you think you might return back to doing more nonfiction or adult fiction, or I guess it depends on what the stories.
I think it does. Yeah, and I do have sort of things percolating for adult. I don't think nonfiction. I probably wouldn't, unless there was, again, something that I love the travel genre. I love reading that kind of stuff. So I like writing it. You never know.
Okay.
Never say never, but I just love fiction so much that I think that's probably where my stories will come from.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. That was quite a roster of questions we went through. So I appreciate so much that we got to go through all of the questions we had. So
thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. This was a real honor and pleasure. So thank you so much for being able to do this panel.
Thank you, Michelle.
It was fun to meet both of you.
It was so lovely. So thank you.